Jesus of Nazareth stands in the Praetorium in Jerusalem at dawn on what Christians will call Good Friday, approximately 33 CE. He's in his early 30s, a Jewish preacher from Galilee who spent 3 years gathering followers with teachings about God's kingdom and claims that trouble both Roman authorities and Jewish religious leadership. Last night, he was arrested in Gethsemane, tried before the Sanhedrin and Pontius Pilate, and condemned to death by crucifixion for sedition, claiming to be king of the Jews, a direct challenge to Roman authority. The process begins with scourging. Roman soldiers strip Jesus and tie him to a post. The flagrum, a whip with multiple leather thongs, embedded with bone fragments and metal balls, tears into his back. Each strike rips away strips of flesh. The Gospel of John mentions this flogging specifically, though it doesn't detail the damage. Modern forensic analysis of crucifixion victims shows typical flogging created deep lacerations across the back, shoulders, and legs, exposing muscle tissue and sometimes bone. Blood loss is significant. Some victims die during this preliminary punishment. Jesus survives the flogging. Soldiers force a crown of thorns onto his head, not just symbolic mockery, but a torture device. The thorns are likely from the Ziziphus spina Christi plant, which has spikes up to 3 inches long. Pressed into his scalp, they create dozens of puncture wounds. The scalp bleeds profusely from even minor injuries due to its rich blood supply. Blood runs down his face, into his eyes, matting his hair. They place the patibulum, the crossbeam, weighing approximately 75 to 125 pounds across his shoulders. The rough wood presses directly against his flogged, raw back. He's forced to carry it from the Praetorium through Jerusalem's streets to Golgotha, about 600 yards. The Gospel accounts mention Simon of Cyrene being compelled to carry the cross when Jesus falls, suggesting he couldn't complete the journey. With his back shredded and blood loss weakening him, even 600 yards becomes impossible. At Golgotha, execution proceeds with practiced efficiency. Roman soldiers have crucified thousands. They throw Jesus onto his back, arms extended along the patibulum. They drive nails through his wrists, not palms, which would tear under body weight. Archaeological evidence from Yehohanan ben Hagkol, a Jewish man crucified around this period, shows nails driven through the space between radius and ulna bones. The 5 to 7 inch iron spikes crush the median nerve, causing shooting electric pain up both arms. They hoist the patibulum with attached victim onto the vertical stake already planted. Position his feet sources vary on whether both feet are nailed together with one spike or separately. The Shroud of Turin, if authentic, suggests one nail through both feet. Either way, the feet are nailed to support the body's weight during the breathing cycle crucifixion forces on victims. Here's the biomechanical horror. Hanging with arms extended at 60 to 70 degrees creates constant tension on intercostal muscles between ribs. Breathing in becomes difficult but possible. Breathing out requires pushing up on nailed feet and pulling on nailed wrists. Every breath is a choice to experience excruciating pain to survive a few more seconds. The cycle begins. Hang and suffocate. Push up to breathe. Collapse from pain. Hang and suffocate. The legs burn with lactic acid buildup. Eventually, they give out permanently. The victim can no longer push up. Carbon dioxide builds in blood. Respiratory acidosis sets in. The heart struggles. Consciousness fades. Death comes. Gospel accounts mention darkness covering the land from noon to 3 p.m., though whether this is metaphorical or describes an actual eclipse is debated. They record Jesus crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" in Aramaic, a quote from Psalm 22. After approximately 6 hours on the cross, Jesus dies. John's Gospel mentions a soldier piercing his side with a spear to confirm death, and blood and water flowing out, possibly indicating pericardial effusion, fluid accumulating around the heart due to cardiac stress. The relatively quick death, 6 hours, versus the typical 24 to 72, has medical explanations. The severe scourging beforehand caused significant blood loss. Carrying the cross through Jerusalem exhausted him further. Dehydration from the previous night's trials without water, possible traumatic or hypovolemic shock. The cumulative trauma meant his body had less reserve to sustain the crucifixion struggle. Roman soldiers don't break Jesus' legs to hasten death, as they do to the 2 criminals crucified alongside him because he's already dead. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy follower, requests the body from Pilate. It's taken down, wrapped in linen, and placed in a tomb. 3 days later, according to Christian teaching, the tomb is found empty, and Jesus is resurrected. But the physical reality of his death remains one of history's most documented and analyzed executions. Here's what makes this worse. Crucifixion was designed specifically to maximize suffering while maintaining public visibility. Romans crucified rebels, slaves, and criminals in prominent locations as deterrent. Jesus' execution on Golgotha, a hill outside Jerusalem's walls where executions regularly occurred, meant his agony was visible to anyone entering or leaving the city during Passover. When Jerusalem's population swelled with pilgrims, his death wasn't hidden. It was theater, demonstration of Roman power over anyone who challenged imperial authority. Additionally, the two criminals crucified alongside him, identified in tradition as Dismas and Gestas, received leg-breaking to hasten their deaths before Sabbath began at sunset. This involved soldiers using an iron bar to shatter the tibia and fibula bones, removing the victim's ability to push up and breathe. Death from asphyxiation followed within minutes. Jesus was spared this additional torture only because he was already dead, but the criminals beside him experienced it fully while conscious. Guy Fawkes stands on the scaffold in Old Palace Yard, Westminster, on January 31, 1606. He's 35 years old, a Catholic explosives expert who's just spent 3 months in the Tower of London being tortured. He's one of 13 conspirators in the Gunpowder Plot, the failed attempt to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament on November 5, 1605, which would have killed King James I, the entire Protestant aristocracy, and potentially hundreds of others. Fawkes was caught in the cellar beneath Parliament, guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder. Under torture, he confessed everything. Now he faces England's most brutal punishment: hanged, drawn, and quartered. The sentence is specific and ritualized. Fawkes will be drawn to the execution site, though he's walked rather than dragged on a hurdle because his body is too damaged from torture. His signature on his confession shows how badly his hands were broken on the rack. The writing is barely legible, a shaky scrawl compared to his earlier bold signature. He can barely climb the scaffold stairs. Guards have to help him up. This execution method has 3 distinct phases, each designed to maximize suffering while keeping the victim conscious. King James wants these conspirators to experience every moment as punishment and as warning to future Catholic rebels. Thousands have gathered to watch. The scaffold is built high enough that the crowd can see everything. Phase 1 is hanging, but not the neck-breaking drop that kills instantly. Fawkes is positioned with the noose around his neck. The rope is measured to lift him just enough to strangle slowly. When the trap drops, he dangles, choking. His face turns purple as the rope constricts his windpipe. He can't breathe. His vision tunnels. His legs kick involuntarily, the dance that gives hanging its grim nickname. This is supposed to last until he's nearly unconscious, but not dead, what executioners call half-hanging. But Fawkes, whether through luck or deliberate choice, manages to jump from the scaffold at the moment of the drop. The fall and the sudden jerk of the rope breaks his neck. He dies almost instantly, going limp on the rope. The crowd murmurs, "This isn't supposed to happen." The executioner cuts him down quickly, but Fawkes is already dead. Phase 2. The drawing proceeds anyway. The sentence must be fulfilled regardless. The executioner makes a long incision from Fawkes' sternum to his groin, opens the abdominal cavity, begins extracting his intestines, uncoiling them in front of the crowd. About 25 feet of small and large intestine are pulled out and thrown into a fire burning beside the scaffold. The executioner reaches back into the body cavity and removes the liver, spleen, stomach organs that would have caused agonizing pain if Fawkes were alive, to feel them being torn free. Castration follows. Fawkes' genitals are cut off and added to the fire. The symbolism is deliberate. His ability to produce Catholic heirs who might continue the conspiracy is destroyed. The smell of burning flesh and digestive matter fills Westminster. The crowd watches, some cheering, some silent, some turning away. The executioner reaches into the thoracic cavity, cutting through the diaphragm, and removes Fawkes' heart. If he were alive, this would be the moment of death. the heart still beating when pulled free. Contemporary accounts of other hangings, drawings, and quarterings describe victims still conscious during disembowelment, watching their own organs removed and burned. Fox is spared this because of his broken neck, but the ritual continues on his corpse. Phase 3 is quartering. Fox's body is beheaded. The head will be mounted on a pike on London Bridge as warning. Then the corpse is divided into 4 parts, using an axe, one strike through the torso just below the rib cage, separating upper from lower body, then additional strikes to separate the quarters. These pieces will be displayed at the 4 corners of the kingdom, sent to different cities where they'll hang in public view for years. The other gunpowder plot conspirators face the same fate over the next 2 days. Robert Wintour, Thomas Bates, and others are hanged, drawn, and quartered while fully conscious, experiencing the complete horror Fox avoided through his neck-breaking fall. Their screams during the drawing phase are recorded by witnesses. Some maintain consciousness through the entire disembowelment, dying only when their hearts are removed. Here's what makes this worse. Fox's quick death by broken neck is seen as mercy or luck, robbing the state of its full punishment. The government has invested 3 months torturing him for information, building the case against all conspirators, preparing this elaborate public execution. They wanted him to suffer maximally, as deterrent to future Catholic plots. His death before the worst tortures robs them of satisfaction and arguably makes him more sympathetic. He escaped the full horror. Additionally, the gunpowder plot's failure was partly due to an anonymous letter warning Lord Monteagle to stay away from Parliament on November 5th. Historians still debate who wrote it. Possibly Francis Tresham, one of the conspirators trying to save Catholic lords who would have died in the blast. This betrayal from within their own group led to the cellar being searched and Fox being discovered. The conspirators were undone by one of their own. Just as so many conspiracy victims throughout history, the execution doesn't end Catholic persecution, it intensifies it. Guy Fawkes Night becomes an annual celebration in England on November 5th, with bonfires and burning of effigies. For centuries, the day reinforces anti-Catholic sentiment. Only in recent decades does it become secularized celebration, divorced from its religious persecution origins. Fox becomes the most famous face of the gunpowder plot, his image enduring in popular culture 400 years later. The mask, representing rebellion against government tyranny, an ironic legacy for a man who tried to commit mass murder in the name of religious extremism. Joan of Arc stands in the old market square in Rouen, France, on May 30th, 1431. She's 19 years old, a peasant girl from Domremy who claims God sent her visions, instructing her to help Charles VII reclaim France from English occupation during the 100 Years' War. Over the past 2 years, she's led French forces to multiple victories, most notably lifting the siege of Orléans, and stood beside Charles at his coronation in Reims. Then she was captured by Burgundian forces allied with England, sold to the English for 10,000 francs, and tried by a church court on charges of heresy, witchcraft, and dressing in men's clothing. The trial was a sham, conducted entirely in Latin which Joan didn't speak, with questions designed to trap her regardless of how she answered, and with no legal representation permitted. She was convicted primarily for refusing to stop wearing male military clothing, which the court deemed evidence of heresy. She briefly recanted under threat of immediate burning, was sentenced to life imprisonment instead, but then resumed wearing men's clothes in prison. Sources suggest either she had no other clothing, or she was deliberately given only men's clothes by guards to force her back into violation. The court used this as evidence of being a relapsed heretic and condemned her to burn. Joan is tied to a tall pillar in the center of a massive pile of wood in the market square. The stake is deliberately high, about 10 feet, so the crowd of approximately 10,000 can see her clearly, and so the flames will take longer to reach her. English officials want her death to be public, visible, and lingering. She wears a long white shift. A tall paper mitre is placed on her head with the words heretic, relapsed, apostate, idolater written on it. A crucifix is brought so she can see it. She requests it be held high enough that she can see it through the smoke and flames. A priest, Martin Ladvenu, stays near her as executioners light the pyre. The fire starts at the bottom. In the dry kindling and smaller wood, it catches quickly in the late May heat. Smoke rises first, thick and choking. Joan starts praying immediately, calling out to saints and to Jesus. Her voice is clear at first, loud enough that witnesses record her words. As smoke rises, she begins coughing. The psychological torture of watching flames approach is immense. She can see the fire climbing the woodpile, can feel the heat increasing, knows exactly what's coming. The flames reach the base of the stake within 5 to 10 minutes. The hem of her shift catches fire. Joan screams. Contemporary witnesses, including Jean Massieu, a church official who attended the execution, record that her screams were heartbreaking. The fire climbs her body. Her shift burns away. The flames consume her legs first. Burning alive follows a horrific progression. First and second-degree burns cause extreme pain as nerve endings in skin are damaged. Third-degree burns, penetrating through all skin layers, initially hurt less because nerves are destroyed, but the surrounding tissue still screams with pain. As flames continue, muscle tissue burns. Fat beneath the skin liquefies and catches fire, creating intense heat. The fire spreads across the body's surface. The worst part is the smoke inhalation. Joan is breathing superheated air mixed with toxic smoke from burning wood and her own burning flesh. The heat sears her respiratory tract. Her lungs fill with smoke and fluid. She's suffocating while burning. Witnesses record that she continued calling out to Jesus and saints, even as the flames engulfed her, her voice growing weaker and more desperate. Death from burning at the stake typically comes from a combination of factors. Smoke inhalation causes asphyxiation, the most common cause of death. Thermal burns cause shock and organ failure. Heat exposure causes hyperthermia. The brain begins shutting down as core body temperature exceeds 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Joan likely lost consciousness after 5 to 10 minutes from smoke inhalation, though her body continued burning for much longer. The executioners were ordered to ensure her body was completely consumed. English authorities didn't want any relics remaining that could become objects of veneration. They pushed the burning pile closer together, added more wood, and kept the fire burning for hours. According to witness testimony, after the flames died down, they raked through the ashes to expose her charred remains to the crowd, proving she was truly dead and not supernaturally rescued. Then they rebuilt the fire and burned everything again, reducing her body to ash and bone fragments. The executioner, Geoffroy Tirage, reportedly told Massieu afterward that he greatly feared to be damned, for he had burned a holy woman. The ashes and remaining bone fragments were thrown into the Seine River to prevent any relics being collected. Nothing physical remained of Joan of Arc. Here's what makes this worse. Joan was executed by the church, supposedly for religious crimes, but the trial was entirely political. The English needed her dead because she was a rallying symbol for French resistance. The University of Paris theologians who condemned her did so under English pressure. Her own king, Charles VII, whom she helped crown, made no attempt to rescue or ransom her. She was abandoned by everyone she'd fought for and executed by a corrupt religious court that violated its own procedures. 25 years later, in 1456, Pope Calixtus III authorized a retrial. The original verdict was overturned. Joan was declared innocent, a martyr, and the victim of judicial murder. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church, the same institution that burned her. The church that killed her for heresy eventually declared her a holy woman, admitting what the executioner already knew in 1431. Additionally, her execution didn't help England win the war. France rallied around her memory. Within 22 years of her death, the English were driven almost entirely out of France. The 100 Years' War ended in French victory. Joan's execution transformed her from a military leader into a martyr, whose memory proved more powerful than her living presence. The English tried to erase her by reducing her to ashes. Instead, they created a legend that would outlive their entire occupation. Robert François Damiens stands in the Place de Grève in Paris on March 28, 1757, about to experience the most meticulously documented execution in European history. He's 42 years old, a domestic servant who, 3 months earlier, approached King Louis XV outside Versailles and stabbed him with a small penknife. The wound was superficial, barely 4 inches deep, not life-threatening. But the crime was regicide, an attempt on the king's life. And French law prescribed a specific, horrific punishment that hadn't been used in over a century. The execution is designed to last 4 hours, with each phase carefully orchestrated for maximum suffering and public spectacle. Approximately 15,000 people have gathered to watch, crowding windows, rooftops, and specially constructed viewing stands. The entire event is documented by multiple observers, including Giacomo Casanova, who watched from a rented window and later wrote detailed descriptions in his memoirs. The torture begins with Damiens being led to a scaffold where executioners use red-hot pincers to tear flesh from his body. They start with his chest, gripping muscle tissue with heated iron and ripping it away. The smell of burning flesh fills the square. Damiens screams. They move to his arms, his thighs, tearing away chunks of meat while he remains fully conscious. Each application of the pincers creates a charred, bleeding wound. Next, executioners pour molten lead, boiling oil, burning resin, and a mixture of melted wax and sulfur into the open wounds. This isn't cauterization. It's deliberate introduction of burning substances into exposed tissue. The purpose is twofold: to cause maximum pain and to prevent Damiens from dying too quickly from blood loss. The burning chemicals sear nerve endings while sealing blood vessels. Witnesses report Damiens' screams are so intense that some spectators faint or vomit. The main event is drawing and quartering by horses, but this proves more difficult than planners anticipated. Damiens is tied spread eagle, with ropes attached to each limb. 4 horses are positioned, 1 for each appendage. When the horses are whipped to pull, Damiens' body doesn't tear. The horses strain, the ropes cut into his flesh. But his joints don't separate. His body stretches grotesquely, ligaments and tendons straining to breaking point, but his limbs remain attached. For over an hour, executioners try different configurations. They bring in additional horses, eventually using 6 horses instead of 4. They make cuts through Damiens' hip and shoulder joints to weaken the connections. They hack at his tendons with knives. Throughout this, Damiens remains conscious, experiencing his body being systematically dismembered while alive. Witnesses report he's praying, calling out to God, begging for death. According to the official execution report preserved in French archives, Damiens' right arm finally tears free after the joint is partially severed with a knife. Then his left arm. The horses pulling his legs require even more assistance. Executioners cut deeper into his hip joints before the legs can be torn away. The entire quartering process takes approximately 1 hour, during which Damiens experiences his limbs being slowly ripped from his body while he watches and feels everything. Even after 3 limbs are removed, Damiens' torso remains alive. Witnesses report seeing his chest still rising and falling, his heart still beating. The executioner has to manually remove the final leg before throwing the torso onto a fire prepared beside the scaffold. Only when the flames consume his remaining body does Damiens finally die, approximately 4 hours after the torture began. The extreme duration and brutality of Damiens' execution horrifies even 18th century observers accustomed to public punishment. Casanova writes that he felt nauseated and couldn't eat for days afterward. The event becomes a turning point in European attitudes toward public execution. Philosophers like Voltaire cite Damiens' death as evidence of barbaric legal practices needing reform. Here's what makes this worse. Damiens' original crime, the knife attack on Louis XV, was almost certainly not intended to kill. Evidence suggests he wanted to wound the king as a warning or protest, not commit murder. The knife he used was small, and he didn't strike with full force. But French law made no distinction between murder and attempted murder. When the victim was the king, the punishment was identical regardless of intent or injury severity. Additionally, Damiens was likely mentally ill. His behavior before and during his trial showed signs of psychological disturbance, religious delusions, paranoid thoughts about Jesuit conspiracies, and confusion about his own motivations. Modern psychiatric analysis of trial records suggests possible schizophrenia or severe delusional disorder. The French legal system of 1757 had no framework for considering mental illness as a mitigating factor. A madman received the same punishment as a calculating assassin. The execution's failure to proceed smoothly, The difficulty quartering Damien's body becomes symbolic of the method's inherent cruelty. When human bodies resist being torn apart by horses, requiring executioners to hack at joints with knives, it reveals the fundamental brutality of the punishment. The extended duration wasn't intended, it was a consequence of human anatomy being more resilient than planners anticipated, forcing improvisation that multiplied Damien's suffering beyond what was already prescribed. Within decades of Damien's death, France begins reforming its execution methods. The French Revolution brings the guillotine designed specifically to be quick and relatively painless compared to methods like quartering. Damiens becomes the last person in France to be drawn and quartered. His 4-hour agony in the Place de Grève marks the end of an era of deliberately prolonged public torture, though the transition to humane execution methods comes too late to save him.